بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، وبه نستعين، ولله الحمد والمنة على نعمه الكثيرة، والصلاة والسلام على النبي العربي الأمين وعلى صحابته الطيبين. صاحب المعالي د.خالد بن محمد العنقري وزير التعليم العالي، الذي ينوب عن سيدي خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك عبد الله بن عبد العزيز أيده الله ورعاه وحفظه في رعاية هذا المعرض والمؤتمر الدولي للتعليم العالي في دورته الخامسة. أصحاب السمو والمعالي والفضيلة والسعادة، أيها الإخوة الكرام، أخواتي الكريمات، لا يبدو الأمر بالدهشة التي نتصورها عندما يتحقق هذا النجاح والتطور في 5 أعوام لمعرضنا ومؤتمرنا هذا، كي نقفز مباشرة اليوم إلى الابتكار في التعليم العالي. فالجهود التي تبذل والعمل المتقن الذي ينفذ واقعياً وتميز العروض فكراً ومضموناً، وكذا تميز العارضين، كل ذلك صنع هذه الصورة البراقة والنجاح المنتظر. أهلاً بكم جميعاً. خير بداية القرآن الكريم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق، خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم، علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى، إن إلى ربك الرجعى.
صدق الله العظيم. صاحب المعالي، أيها الحفل الكريم، أخواتي الكريمات، المعرفة كنز الحضارة ومسبار السمو لمن تضيء دربه ووجدانه، والمعرفة بها حقق المسلمون في تاريخ الإنسانية شأوا بالغ الأهمية. هذا الذي تحقق للمسلمين لا ينساه التاريخ الإنساني ولا ينساهم، ولعلنا بالمعرفة نعيد صفحات التاريخ من جديد. الآن يتفضل معالي وزير التربية وزير التعليم العالي د.خالد بن محمد العنقري بالرعاية الملكية بإلقاء كلمته ترحيبية.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. معالي وزير التربية والمهارات في جمهورية إيرلندا السيد روري كوين، معالي رئيس جامعة هونج للعلوم والتقنية توني تشان، معالي رئيس جامعة سنغافورة الوطنية تشوان، أصحاب المعالي والفضيلة، ضيوفنا الكرام من داخل المملكة وخارجها، أيها الحفل الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني في البداية أن أنقل لكم تحيات خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك عبد الله بن عبد العزيز وسمو ولي عهده الأمين الأمير سلمان بن عبد العزيز، وسمو النائب الثاني الأمير مقرن بن عبد العزيز، لتشريفكم حفلنا هذا وإسهامكم في فعاليات هذا المؤتمر. ويشرفني أن أرفع أسمى آيات الشكر والعرفان لمقام خادم الحرمين الشريفين لرعايته الكريمة الوافية لأعمال الدورة الخامسة للمعرض والمؤتمر الدولي للتعليم العالي. كما أتقدم لكم جميعاً بخالص الشكر والتقدير لحضوركم ومشاركتكم الإيجابية في فعاليات المعرض والمؤتمر الدولي للتعليم العالي في دورته الخامسة لهذا العام 1435-2014. ولا شك أن تلكم المعارض وما يصاحبها تعد نقلة نوعية تثري المسيرة الأكاديمية للتعليم العالي، ونحن نتطلع بمشيئة الله أن تمثل فعاليات هذه الدورة أساساً عملياً واقعياً يعتمد عليه في مناقشة القضايا المستجدة وتبادل الخبرات والتعرف على التجارب التي تسهم في صياغة أفكار ومبادرات تثري الخطى المتميزة لمسيرة التعليم العالي في المملكة العربية السعودية. ضيوفنا الكرام، هذه هي الدورة الخامسة لهذا الملتقى العلمي الحافل، أو بعبارة أخرى الملتقى الدولي لتعزيز التعاون وبناء الشراكات بين مؤسسات التعليم العالي السعودية ونظيراتها العالمية، وتأكيد التفاهم المشترك حول التعامل مع القضايا التي تهم التعليم العالي في جميع أنحاء العالم. لقد اجتهدنا في تطوير المعرض خلال الأعوام الماضية سعياً لأن يكون ميداناً رحباً للتعرف على الجامعات والمعاهد ومؤسسات التعليم العالي الأخرى في داخل المملكة وخارجها من الجامعات العالمية المرموقة، فضلاً عن كونه منصة للتعارف بين الطلبة وأعضاء هيئة التدريس من الجامعات المختلفة والمعنيين بشؤون التعليم العالي. لقد شهد المعرض والمؤتمر الدولي للتعليم العالي في دورته السابقة 1434-2013 ميلادية إقبالاً كبيراً من جهات عالمية ومحلية، حيث أسهمت فيه 490 مؤسسة للتعليم العالي، وبلغ عدد المشتركين في المعرض أكثر من 1000 عارض من 36 دولة. إن غاية ما يقال حيال هذا الحدث الأكاديمي إنه إحدى خطانا الجادة في تحقيق التوازن بين إيقاع أحدث أساليب التقدم التكنولوجي وإيقاع الميراث الثقافي الروحي. ضيوفنا الكرام، أيها الحفل الكريم، تدرك حكومة المملكة العربية السعودية بقيادة خادم الحرمين الشريفين حفظه الله الدور الرئيس للتعليم العالي في تنمية الموارد البشرية وتنويع مصادر الاقتصاد الوطني، وفي تحسين الوعي والخدمات الصحية، وفي الازدهار المعيشي للفرد والمجتمع، وفي توطين التقنية وتنمية الإبداع والابتكار وتهيئة البيئة الملائمة لذلك. ولذا كان التعليم العالي من القطاعات التنموية التي لقيت اهتماماً كبيراً خلال الأعوام الماضية، وكان نتيجة ذلك تطوراً كمياً ونوعياً في جميع مؤسسات التعليم العالي ومحاوره وأنشطته، بما في ذلك حجم البنى التحتية من مدن جامعية وإمكانات علمية، وكذلك أعداد الملتحقين والمقيدين وأعداد أعضاء هيئة التدريس والكوادر المساندة فيها. وكذلك عنيت الوزارة والجامعات بتعزيز مقومات الاقتصاد المعرفي من خلال تقديم أنشطة البحث العلمي وبرامج الإبداع ورعاية الابتكار. وتحقيقاً لذلك نفذت الوزارة عديداً من المبادرات مثل أودية التقنية في كل من الرياض وجدة والظهران ومكة المكرمة، لتكون بمثابة محاضن لرعاية الابتكار والإبداع من خلال إنشاء حدائق العلوم ومراكز الابتكار والمرافق البحثية للشركات من داخل المملكة العربية السعودية وخارجها، فضلاً عن 14 مركزاً للتميز البحثي و8 مراكز للأبحاث الواعدة في الجامعات الناشئة و3 مراكز لتقنية النانو. كما ترعى الوزارة عدداً من البرامج التطويرية مثل برنامج تطوير الأقسام العلمية في الجامعات السعودية، وبرنامج القيادة النوعية وإدارة مؤسسات التعليم العالي، وبرنامج المشروع الوطني لقياس مخرجات التعليم العالي، وبرنامج تنمية الإبداع والابتكار في الجامعات السعودية، وبالإضافة إلى البرامج الدورية والدراسات التي يقدمها مركز القيادة الأكاديمية في التعليم العالي. وتعمل الوزارة على تنمية الإبداع والابتكار وغرس روح التنافس وتحفيز الطلبة على التفكير والتدبر الذي يحث عليه ديننا الإسلامي الحنيف منذ بداية الالتحاق في مرحلة الدراسة الجامعية، وذلك بعقد المؤتمرات السنوية العلمية الطلابية التي يستعرض فيها الطلبة إنجازاتهم العلمية والبحثية. ويصاحب المؤتمر كل عام معرض للابتكار وبراءة الاختراع ومشاريع لريادة الأعمال وغيرها من الأنشطة. وجدير بالذكر أن كل هذه المبادرات والبرامج والأنشطة والمراكز تسعى بحرص وإخلاص على توطين مفاهيم الابتكار والإبداع وتنميتها وبناء البيئة المناسبة لها، أسوة بممارسات الجامعات العالمية المتميزة في هذا الجانب. وتسهم في ذلك جميع الجامعات السعودية بوظائف مختلفة ومتكاملة. ويتركز دور الجامعات في هذا السياق على التعرف على أنواع الابتكار والإبداع الذي ترنو حاجة المجتمع السعودي إليه، وتوجيه التعليم والأنشطة البحثية إلى تأهيل المبدعين والمبتكرين ومؤازرتهم ورعايتهم. ومن ضمن وظائف الابتكار تحسين المهارات التعليمية والبحثية لأعضاء هيئة التدريس بهدف تجويد العمليات داخل الجامعة والمنتجات البحثية للجامعة أو المهارات العلمية والحياتية للخريجين. وقد استخدم التعليم العالي أساليب مبتكرة في التعليم الإلكتروني والتعليم عن بعد بغرض توسيع المشاركة المجتمعية في التعليم العالي، وجعل المتعلم محوراً للعملية التعليمية. كما توسعت الجامعات السعودية في إتاحة نمط التعلم الإلكتروني من خلال أحدث التقنيات في تقديم برامج متعددة، بالإضافة إلى ما تقوم به الجامعة الفتية الجامعة السعودية الإلكترونية. ومن محفزات الإبداع والابتكار الدور الذي يؤديه التعليم العالي في إنشاء ريادة الأعمال، ومن ثم النمو الاقتصادي والمجتمعي وتحسين مستوى الدخل وزيادة فرص العمل وتعزيز الرفاهية والازدهار. وهكذا لبى التعليم العالي كل النداءات المخلصة الهادفة إلى النهضة المتوثبة في كل جانب من جوانب مسيرتنا الأكاديمية، إدراكاً منه بأن نداءات التقدم لن تكون إلا أصداء تتردد في الفضاء إذا لم يرتكز تنفيذها على الصدق والإخلاص. ضيوفنا الكرام، أيها الحفل الكريم، لقد واكبت مسيرة التعليم العالي في المملكة العربية السعودية اتساع مساحة المملكة بأطرافها المترامية، فلبت مطالبها، كما سايرت النمو السكاني وارتفاع نسبة الشباب في سن الدراسة الجامعية، فزادت القدرة الاستيعابية للجامعات التي انتشرت في أرجاء كل مناطق المملكة، حتى وصل عددها إلى 38 جامعة حكومية وأهلية، إضافة إلى جامعة الملك عبد الله للعلوم والتقنية. وما زال صدى الأمر الملكي الذي صدر منذ أسبوعين بإنشاء جامعات جديدة في كل من حفر الباطن وبيشة وجدة يتردد في نفوسنا حباً واعتزازاً بأبوة قيادتنا الحكيمة. وتضم جامعاتنا الآن أكثر من 600 كلية، ويدرس في التعليم العالي أكثر من 1,300,000 طالب وطالبة. كما تجاوز عدد المبتعثين ضمن برنامج خادم الحرمين الشريفين للابتعاث الخارجي أكثر من 150,000 طالب وطالبة يدرسون في مراحل التعليم العالي المختلفة، وكلها تجيء وفاء وتلبية للاحتياجات الرئيسية لسوق العمل في المملكة. ومما يجدر ذكره كذلك أن نسبة الإناث الملتحقات بالتعليم العالي وصلت إلى نحو 55% من إجمالي الطلبة المقيدين. وقد رافق هذا التوسع الانتشار الكمي عناية كبيرة بالجودة، تمثلت في دور المركز الوطني للقياس والتقويم لضمان جودة مدخلات التعليم العالي وحسن توجيهها إلى التخصصات المناسبة لقدراتها، ومن خلال عمل الهيئة الوطنية للتقويم والاعتماد الأكاديمي في تنفيذ عمليات الاعتماد المؤسسي والبرامجي، إضافة إلى حصول عدد من البرامج والكليات والجامعات على الاعتماد الأكاديمي الدولي. وتعمل جميع الجامعات السعودية على استكمال متطلبات الاعتماد الأكاديمي سواء على المستوى الوطني أو الدولي، من خلال توجيه وكالات وإدارات متخصصة في الجامعات لمتابعة إجراءات الجودة والتقويم والاعتماد المناسب لكل تخصص. إن جميع الدول تسعى إلى أن يكون التعليم لديها مطابقاً للمنظومة العالمية المتميزة، فليس كافياً أن تحصل الجامعة على تصنيف عالمي، بل المطلوب أن تتوافر لديها منظومة تعليمية رائدة عالمياً. وفي سبيل تحقيق ذلك تزايدت الميزانيات المخصصة للتعليم عموماً وللتعليم العالي باضطراد خلال السنوات الخمس الماضية، حتى وصلت الميزانية المخصصة للتعليم العام والتعليم العالي والتدريب هذا العام إلى 210 مليار ريال، أي ما نسبته نحو 25%، بلغ منها للتعليم العالي ما نسبته 10% من الميزانية العامة للدولة، والتي تبلغ 855 مليار ريال. وعلى الرغم من التزام الدولة بتمويل التعليم العالي، إلا أن من المهم توفير مصادر أخرى لاستدامة التمويل، واستطاع حتى الآن عدد من الجامعات الحكومية توفير مصادر تمويل إضافية، ولا سيما من خلال الأوقاف والاستثمارات العلمية، ومن المؤمل التوسع في حجم هذه الأوقاف وتبنيها في بقية الجامعات. كما استقطب عدد من الجامعات تمويلاً من القطاع الخاص لدعم كراسي البحث العلمي، وتنوعت اهتماماتها في كثير من العلوم الأساسية والنظرية والتطبيقية والطبية وقضايا مجتمعية كثيرة. أيها الضيوف الكرام، تتطلع وزارة التعليم العالي في فعاليات هذه الدورة الخامسة إلى إسهام 430 جهة وأكثر من 1000 عارض من 30 دولة، ومن المتوقع إن شاء الله أن يتم توقيع 18 اتفاقية بين الجامعات السعودية ونظيراتها الأجنبية، ويتوقع أن تعقد 7 ورش عمل متخصصة و75 ورشة عمل عامة. ولعل هذه المناسبة تكون فرصة كبيرة للتعارف بين مؤسسات التعليم العالي والقائمين عليها والمعنيين بهذا القطاع التنموي الحيوي من أعضاء هيئة التدريس والطلاب والطالبات وأولياء الأمور، والاطلاع على مؤسسات التعليم العالي ومستجداتها وتقنيات التعليم العالي ومجالات الإبداع والابتكار فيه، التي تسهم فيها كثير من دول العالم ومن بينها المملكة العربية السعودية. إن مشاركة عدد كبير من الخبراء المتميزين من دول العالم سيضيف قيمة علمية ونوعية لهذا الملتقى، كما أن وزارة التعليم العالي يسعدها أن تتلقى آراءكم وترحب بتوصياتكم وبالاستماع إلى تجاربكم في هذا الشأن. وفي الختام أتوجه بالشكر جزيلاً وبالتقدير وافراً لجميع المشاركين والحضور، وأشكر الجهات التي أسهمت بالمشاركة الإيجابية مؤتمراً ومعرضاً إعداداً وتنظيماً لإنجاح فعاليات هذه الدورة من المعرض والمؤتمر الدولي للتعليم العالي. ونسدي شكراً الخاص شركتي أرامكو السعودية وسابك على رعايتهما عديداً من مناشط هذا المحفل، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بون شاسع بين أن تحلم وتنتظر خيالاتك تسوق لك حلمك أو تسوقه إليك دون حضور لك، وبين أن تحلم وتمضي بك ويمضي بك عنفوانك تسابق الحلم وبين يديك تفاصيله وبعض من تشكلاته المستقبلية. أليس من حق أبنائنا وبناتنا أن يحلموا؟ أليس من حق أوطانهم أن تنتظر هذا الحلم واقعاً؟ لعل هذه الأسئلة يجيب عليها معرضنا ومؤتمرنا حول الابتكار في التعليم العالي. الآن يا صاحب المعالي، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، أيها الحفل الكريم، أخوات الكريمات، مشاهدينا ومشاهداتنا عبر قناتي عالي والثقافية السعودية، نبدأ الكلمات الرئيسة لهذا المؤتمر، ونبدأ بالكلمة الأولى لمعالي الدكتور روري كوين، وزير التربية والمهارات بجمهورية إيرلندا.
Good morning to everybody. Your Excellency, Minister العنقري, Excellencies, and distinguished guests. It is a great honor to be here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at the invitation of His Excellency the Minister. Our two countries have built up a firm friendship in the area of higher education. Today, young Saudi students can now be found across all of Ireland participating in the King Abdullah Scholarship Programme. It is, I have to say personally, a great pleasure for me to make my first visit to this kingdom and indeed to reciprocate the visit which Minister Al-عنقري made to Ireland in the year 2011. It is also an honour to be here in the company of so many world-renowned educationalists and indeed educational leaders. Gentlemen, the topics up for discussion over the next few days are, in my opinion, hugely relevant to policymakers and educational leaders around the world, and I personally look forward to hearing some of these deliberations. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, has in a seminal report called educational skills, the global currency of the 21st century. If this country is able to harness the great natural potential of its people with an education system that can shape innovators, entrepreneurs, and also creative thinkers, the policies, Your Excellency, are truly enormous. Ireland, sadly, lacks the great natural resources of Saudi Arabia when it comes to petrochemicals. However, where we have some of the same attributes in our demography. Half of the population of the kingdom, as you know, is under 25, a proportion which will grow in the coming years. I want to tell you, for those of you who aren't familiar with my country, the Republic of Ireland, that Ireland has the youngest workforce in the European Union. From the Irish experience, we can say with some degree of pride that when young people are given opportunities through high-quality education, the potential for sustainable growth and development is truly enormous. We know the transformational value of education. We are actually living through it. 40 years ago, after 30 years of independence, Ireland was a small, peripheral country with an economy which, quite frankly, was failing. And that was the crisis that many of the leaders of my time as a young boy were confronting. Was the pursuit of independence itself a failure? Had we failed the generation that was now in front of us? And we decided effectively to start again. And we started with education. We started with education. Since then, Ireland has become one of the most global societies in the world. For example, 9 of the top 10 global software companies have operations in Ireland, and their European headquarters in Dublin or Cork. All of the top 10 internet companies, such as Google and Facebook, have operations in Ireland. 9 of the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies have a base in Ireland, and we export, with a population of 4.4 million people, we export 55 billion euro in pharma product each year. Colleagues, Ireland has other advantages which have contributed to this development, notably a competitive economy and business-friendly policies and consistency in macro-government economic policy. But investment in education and investment in our people in particular, that was fundamental to the basis for our transformation. Our young people are now amongst the best educated in the world, with the highest rate of participation in higher education. For example, 92% of our high school children, those aged 18 and below, complete the full journey through second-level education. And over 60% of them progress to third-level education. Following a decade of significant investment in scientific research, very consciously invested in by the Irish economy with the help of the European research funds, Ireland is now ranked in the top 20 of global research performers across all disciplines. And I want to say, Your Excellency, we are delighted that increasing numbers of Saudi students are availing of the opportunities in the Irish education system in areas where we have real strength and which underpin our exporting economy. The Irish government takes the responsibility for educating young people from around the world very seriously. And I'll tell you why. It's very, very simple. If you live on an island, off the west coast of Europe, you don't get many people passing through. We're not on some kind of global crossroads. So we want to have the enlightenment and the experience and the creativity of people who come to live and work and study with us. That's why we are opening up to new possibilities to strengthen the provision for further enhancing the educational and student experience of Saudi students and indeed other students from around the world coming to Ireland. However, as we all know attending this conference, Ireland, Saudi Arabia, and all other societies face a rapidly changing world over the next 20 years. We cannot stand still as new technologies change how education itself is understood and delivered. The new industries of the 21st century will be a product, in my view and the view of many people, a product of the fusion of science with arts, creativity, and innovation. We need to look at how we give all our people the right skills to be able to think creatively, to adapt to new demands, and indeed to create new technologies, business ideas, and opportunities which will allow our societies to thrive. For example, how do we ensure that everyone has the opportunity to avail of an education that is right for them? How do we re-skill people when their own skills no longer match the demands of the economy? And how can all of this be delivered effectively and efficiently? These are, you will readily agree, big themes and big challenges. Ireland is not alone in being engaged in comprehensive reform of our education system to allow us to better meet these challenges in the coming decade. To foster creative, critical thinking, to enable learners to make the best use of emerging technologies, to bring our education system closer to the needs of business and enterprise without undermining its important contribution to culture, tolerance, and indeed to humanity. Your Excellency, I look forward to hearing from the other distinguished speakers on this important topic and to getting a chance to speak to many of you over the coming days. Thank you very much for your invitation.
والآن يتفضل معالي مدير جامعة هونج كونج للعلوم والتقنية معالي الدكتور توني تشان.
Salam. Good morning. It's a great honor to be here. My first time at RIAC, but not the first time in the kingdom. I have a great pleasure of meeting the minister this morning, and I'm very impressed by all those who are present at this conference. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I hope I can bring some interesting topics on the table for the discussion. The minister actually in his speech referred to entrepreneurship, and that's the topic of my presentation. In particular, I want to talk about entrepreneurship as it is emerging in my part of the world. As you know, Hong Kong since 1997 has become part of China after a long tradition of being a British colony. And so we in Hong Kong have a special vantage point of looking at the developments, including higher education, in China. We are governed by a unique system of government. It's called one country, two systems. So that means Hong Kong is part of China, but we really operate differently from mainland China, in particular in the area of education. So I hope my perspective today will give you a kind of both insider and outsider's look at what's happening in higher education or in entrepreneurship in China, but especially the role of universities. That's the plan of my talk. Okay. Yeah, okay, I can read here. So I have basically three main parts of my talk. One is China as an economic powerhouse. Many of you probably know better than me. Second topic is how to nurture entrepreneurship, especially in university. And finally, a little bit about some of the successes and ongoing challenges. So China now is widely recognized as the world's second largest economy. Okay, and this is a big number. I don't have to cite the figures. But what may be, this is well known. What may not be as well known is that the Chinese government has been really pushing and making major investments in science and technology development and entrepreneurship. And you can see from there, just from 2010 to 2011, there's almost a 20% increase in the investment in science and technology. And the base number is almost $500 billion renminbi. So if you divide by 6, I think now it's always fluctuating. That's the amount of the US dollar. And China is now in the middle of its 12 five-year plan. So every 5 years there's a plan. And I think the current plan started in 2011. So as part of that plan, China plans to increase its investment in R&D from 1.6% of GDP to about 2.2%. This is still small, the number, compared to, for example, Singapore, for example, to South Korea, for example, compared to even the US. My suspicion is it's also small compared to what's happening in the kingdom. I mean, 25% of the budget for education, that's a huge number by any worldwide standard. And I'm sure part of that is going into R&D. China is also developing national personnel policies to attract both its own diaspora around the world to go back to China to lead this effort, but also to attract talents from around the world. Some of you, especially presidents and rectors of universities from around the world, probably already familiar with this 1,000 talent scheme, because the idea is to attract people from around the world to actually work and settle in China and give them extra resources. Some of those could be faculty members in worldwide universities. So these are some of the trends that's going on. The other part also is probably not as well known, is the model of economic development and how it translates into entrepreneurship in China. The key word here is that it's market economy. So a lot of globally competition. Government, of course, still plays a big role, but there's more and more of a trend to market economy. There's a recognition that entrepreneurship will drive innovation. As you know, China's modernization started about 30 years ago when Deng Xiaoping went to southern China, just across the border from Hong Kong, and announced the opening up of the Chinese economy and foreign investment. And in those days, the development was led by primarily low-cost labor. So in those days, probably the things you buy from around the world, many of them are made in China. But the cost of labor in China, especially in coastal China, including Southern China, has gone up. I think the labor cost in Shenzhen, which is across from Hong Kong, is within a factor of 2 of that of Hong Kong. So, so a lot of the industry is moving inland, or actually moving out of China to more developing countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and so on. Just look at the label of the stuff you're buying these days. They are becoming less and less made in China. So there's a realization that the country has to move forward up the value chain. And the only way you can do that is through education and investment in science and technology. So here are some of the things that you see here. When you go to China, I'm sure many of you do, in almost every city, and associated with every main university in China, there's a science and technology park. Okay, if you go to Peking University and Tsinghua University, there's one. In fact, that area is called Zhongguanchuan. Okay, that's where a lot of the high-tech startups are there. What may not be as well known is across the border from Hong Kong in Shenzhen, there's also part of China's Silicon Valley is there. I'll give you an example. For example, I noticed Huawei, the red sign here. Okay, that's one of the world's largest telecommunication company. Its headquarters is less than 1 hour from Hong Kong, from our university. And they have R&D all over the world. So there are all these things popping up. And in particular, in the Pearl River Delta, which is across the border from Hong Kong, there's a lot more of the SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises that are going on. In fact, China, in terms of its cultural tradition, in terms of the people, is very entrepreneurial. Not in science and technology per se, but entrepreneurial in terms of finding their own business. Here, the first bullet, we have some area where what we have observed China's sort of solution in terms of their direction of entrepreneurship and investment. One is, of course, in high technology. That's almost half of the venture capitalist investment is in that area. Okay, and the other one is healthcare. China has a big population with the one-child policy, even though that's fading out. Disproportionately high fraction of the population is older, and they are getting into in the age where they require a lot of healthcare. So that's both a challenge and opportunity in terms of investing in there. Energy, as you know, China is one of the biggest consumption of worldwide energy. A lot of it is not very clean. And so that's also a big area of investment. Now, I mentioned about entrepreneurship culture, and this number, this last bullet, I was actually surprised when I found out about it. So in 2010, OECD announced this number. They studied the self-employment rate of the population of different countries. So in the US, it's 7.2%. Which seems reasonable. It's just, for me, look around my friends, who started their own business, who work for the big company. What's surprising is China is over 50%. This was an article in the Business Week quoting an OECD study. This is an amazing number, but it's quoted in Business Week. Okay, so, and in fact, if you look at the article, there's a question to the population they survey. There's people coming and say, do you want to start your own business? Or do you want to work for a big company? About half said they want to start their own business. And this is quite a shocking number, actually, to me. But that's what the OECD study is. Here's a list of private entrepreneurs that is more or less known around the world. These are all started their own business. They are leading some of the world's largest businesses now. Baidu, you can call that the Google of China. Okay, it's the first Chinese company to be listed in NASDAQ. Tencent, probably the biggest internet company that is least well known around the world. It's headquartered in Shenzhen. It's famous QQ has almost 180 million concurrent users at any one time. Its latest product is called WeChat. It's something like an improved version of WhatsApp. Probably many of you know Facebook just pay an enormous amount of money for. Alibaba, I'm sure many of you know, supposedly is going IPO. And when it goes IPO, it's supposed to be the largest IPO ever. Jack Ma, in fact, the picture on the right, that's Jack Ma receiving an honorary doctorate from our university last November. And it was his first honorary doctorate. And so on. Probably Xiaomi, the last one, you may not have heard of yet. Xiaomi is, they make small, not expensive smartphones. So they're competing with the iPhones and the Samsungs. And they would do that. So some of these entrepreneurs in China already successful and leading huge multinational enterprises. So the role of the university is recognized in this. Because after all, entrepreneurs they're all students at one point. And we also heard that from the minister that the investment, both ministers I should say, investment in young people is the key. First of all, they are a blank piece of paper, they have ideas, but more importantly, they know what other people like. Frankly, people my age, we're the dwindling population. I have never played a mobile game, but that's one of the largest market now. And those are the 20-year-old that make them. They know what the market is like. So China now, the higher education system, has almost 2,500 universities. It's one of the largest in the world. Now, it's not all of the same quality, as you can imagine. You've already heard about Beida, Tsinghua, and so on. China has a C9. So there's China 9. That's like the elite 9 university. In fact, some of the universities in Hong Kong, we meet regularly with this group of university. The amount of investment in this top-tier university is tremendous. I can tell you as a fact that the investment per faculty member in the C9 university is higher than those in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is one of the richer economies in the world. The number is just staggering. Just give you an example. Every year in China, about 10 million high school graduates come out of the system. 10 million, that's more than the population of Hong Kong and Ireland and Singapore. And we get some of them to come to Hong Kong. I'm sure a lot of them go overseas. The estimate is about 300,000 of them are in the US. They constitute the largest foreign student in the US today. 10 years ago, they are not even in the top 5 for sure. 10 years ago. As science and technology development, I already mentioned some of these science parks. If you look at the third bullet, all kinds of science parks that are being done, I already mentioned. For example, the lower right picture, I visit many times. That's the science park outside of Tsinghua University. It's one of the most impressive. I was told by the official when I visited that the amount of tax revenue raised in that science park is much, much more than the government has invested in that science park. I've stayed in the hotel just outside for that science park. It's always full. There's always like 10 conferences going on for people going in there. So I can tell sort of at the gut level what kind of activity is going on. I have just 2 more slides. The one thing that probably many of the audience would know in higher education is that there is a large number of international top-tier university open some sort of branch campuses in China. Now, this trend actually started in this part of the world, in the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and so on. But in China, this is where it is. Just a list of those. Duke just opened its campus, just literally within the last few months. Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool and Nottingham Ningbo has been around for a few years. NYU is opening a campus in Pudong in Shanghai. Its president was a former president of Cornell University. The Chinese University of Hong Kong, one of our sister institutions in Hong Kong, is opening a campus in Shenzhen, just across the campus. It's the size of our university. So this is not this branch university, it's a whole new university that is going on. And I heard that Monash University in Australia is opening up a postgraduate university in Shanghai. And by the way, what is not in here is that also Shanghai is opening up its own, not partnering with any other university, a version of Caltech. It's called Shanghai Tech that is being planned and organized. So a lot of these things are going on to try to attract the world's top talents. So just one or two slides on the successes and challenges. So everybody in the world, every country in the world try to invest and try to build their own business, build up entrepreneurship, but it's easier said than done. So China has its own unique set of features that aids, but also that might limit its possibilities. One thing is, entrepreneurs are often the best when they are forced by necessity. In other words, people in Wenzhou and Shanghai, they're well known to be entrepreneurial businessmen. They were, many of the successful business people in Hong Kong moved from Shanghai to Hong Kong 60 years ago, and they're very, very successful. But the other one is, as you know, the Confucius culture values harmony over everything else. So that's where family, group, and societal stability is emphasized. That goes a little bit against breaking out on your own and being an entrepreneur. Hard work, education, those are very much ingrained in the Chinese culture. So this is, some part of this is conducive to entrepreneurship. Others are kind of not exactly conducive. So that's finally, this is my last slide, the paradox. The country in China is making a big push, so top down, if you will. But in its way of doing it, one thing it has to look out for is academic freedom, in the sense of when you invest, you want accountability, you want to make sure things are done the right way, but then on the one hand, you might run into inhibiting academic autonomy. The Confucius culture, as I said before, so it cuts both ways in terms of encouraging this. As society gets richer, China is actually getting more rich, and the drive for entrepreneurship may dwindle. And we see that in Hong Kong a little bit. And finally, when successful entrepreneurs will go into the market, and it needs the support of the government, but perhaps not as much control by the government. So these are some of the support and control is the challenges that China has to face. So that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
والكلمة الثالثة لمعالي الدكتور توني تشوان مدير جامعة سنغافورة الوطنية.
Good morning, Your Excellency, Mr. Khalid, I'm العنقري, the Minister of Higher Education, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to speak at this prestigious conference. And it's also very impressive to witness firsthand the remarkable initiatives of King Abdullah, the custodian of the two holy mosques, in his leadership in education and in particular higher education. I was asked to talk about the rise of innovative universities and in particular how they can contribute to the development of innovation ecosystems and economic development, and to illustrate this with some practical examples. And I want to start by talking about what is an innovative university. You can see the dictionary definition is one that uses new ideas or methods or having new ideas about how something can be done, to which I would add that this should be directed at creating distinctive new value in either education, research, or service. And the first question I think that we should think about is, why must universities become more innovative? And there are many drivers for this, of which I'll just mention two which I think are particularly relevant to our discussion. The first is that the world of work is changing very rapidly. And when I first graduated more than 30 years ago, most of us thought about having a career for life. We might do 2 or 3 jobs during the course of our careers. But today, if you look at data from the US, for example, the average university graduate, before they reach 42, would have done at least 10 jobs. And these jobs can be in very different sectors. So graduates today are not going in for a career for life, they're going in for a lifetime of careers. And the structure of economic job creation is also changing rapidly. Many of you are familiar with the phenomenon of job polarization. And here's data from the US which shows that in the last 30 years, there's been significant growth in high-skill and low-skill jobs, but relatively little growth in middle-skill jobs. In fact, every time there's a recession, most of the jobs lost are in the middle-skill area. And this phenomenon is also seen in the EU and most other developed economies. So what this means in the US, for example, is that the jobs that are growing in the last decade are jobs that require complex problem solving, require flexibility, experience, and knowledge of context. So things like doctors, like myself, lawyers and nurses. But if you do routine jobs like transactions or routine production, then you can be either replaced by smart software algorithms or robots or process improvements. So this creates incredible demands on universities to innovate in order to better prepare their graduates to deal with a future work environment which is much more uncertain. And the key to that is really developing more entrepreneurial students. There are also, I think, very important economic reasons which Tony Chan has mentioned for why entrepreneurship does fuel value-added economic growth. I would also say that the expectations of the role of universities are also increasing. I don't know whether this happens in this part of the world, but I meet colleagues from other universities, and when their policymakers or politicians visit Silicon Valley and see all this incredible array of high-tech startups, they often come back and ask their own universities, why can't you be more like Stanford or Berkeley? So the expectations are changing, and the question is, what are the forms in which innovation can occur in education and R&D, and how can this better create economic and social value? Here we have tremendous number of examples from all around the world, but if you pardon me, I'll just focus on a few examples from the National University of Singapore, simply because that's the university I know best. I think Tony has also highlighted the importance of nurturing entrepreneurial students, and this is particularly important for small countries like Singapore, stuck in between much larger countries with very hungry entrepreneurial populations like China and India. And I want to say that we have a strong emphasis on nurturing entrepreneurship in our students, and our flagship program is NUS Overseas Colleges, where our students are immersed for 1 year in full-time internship in high-tech startup companies, and they take courses at partner universities in some of the world's leading entrepreneurial hubs. We have 8 overseas colleges. Here are just a sample of them. The oldest and most popular is the one in Silicon Valley. Our students intern for a year in high-tech startups, and they take courses at night from Stanford University. We also have them in China, in India, and the latest one is in New York. We think this program has been successful because the alumni who have finished this program come back and they've started more than 180 companies, of which 100 are still active. And several of them have done pretty well. They've been acquired for multi-million-dollar deals. For example, a company called 10Cube was acquired by McAfee. PeakSpy was acquired by StubHub. And just this week, one of the NUS companies was acquired by a US company for $30 million US. So we think that there's great potential. But in parallel with focusing on entrepreneurial education, it's also very important that NUS helps to contribute to developing a vibrant local startup ecosystem. This will make best use of this talent, but it's also critical to retain that talent in Singapore, because if you don't have a vibrant startup ecosystem, then these entrepreneurial alumni will go to the Silicon Valley or other places. So you might have read the January issue of The Economist, which talked about Block 71, which is very close to the National University of Singapore. It's an old 7-story industrial building which has been converted to become a high-tech incubator system. And The Economist describes it as the world's most tightly packed entrepreneurial ecosystem and a perfect place to study how a government can support startup colonies. This map shows the Block 71, just to give you an idea of the geography. That pink line is the highway. NUS is on the lower left side. N House is where all the students returning from our overseas colleges stay. It's a residential program. We have incubators very close by. And just across the road, 5 minutes by car or 3 minutes by subway, we run an incubator unit in Block 71. So we help to drive the vibrancy of that ecosystem through the talent, through deal flows, and through mentors. And a combination of these two factors, education and startup ecosystem development, has been very instrumental. Those programs are really for undergraduates. We also have programs for graduate students. Here's an example of the Singapore Stanford Biodesign, which is a collaboration between Singapore and the Stanford University's program in Biodesign. It is intended to try to nurture a next generation of medical device innovators who work between engineering and biomedical sciences and who are trying to meet the needs of Asian patients and Asian healthcare. And the heart of this is really the biodesign fellows who are either doctors or engineers, and they spend their time in a very carefully mentored program. They work in the hospital, they identify needs, they generate solutions, do due diligence on them, prototype them, but very importantly, they also train how to develop the commercialization strategies and business plans in order to bring the ideas to economic fruition. So this is a new program. It's hard to say how well it would develop, but it has great promise, I think, for helping Singapore to develop this sector, which is very important for us. Apart from education, of course, innovative approaches are applied by all universities to try to enhance the ability to translate the R&D that they do. And here are two examples from NUS. Many examples exist in many universities around the world. The first is how to bring together all the different disciplines that are required in order to solve real-world problems. And we have done this by creating integrative research clusters. And we've taken it one step further by using these clusters to engage with a whole cluster of industry leaders in a specific field. So here is an example of Keppel, which is a Singapore born and bred multinational company. It is the world's leader in designing and manufacturing offshore oil rigs. We partnered Keppel in a $76 million collaboration, which makes use of the deep expertise that NUS has in this area. So the industry partnership generates tough questions which help our academics do better work, and the work that we do, we hope, helps them to become more competitive. And we work in 4 areas: new technologies for deep water exploration, Arctic technology, productivity improvements in yard operations, and then deep sea seabed nodule harvesting of precious metals and rare minerals. But universities can work within themselves with companies, but they can also work as part of a larger national R&D plan. And here I just want to say a bit about how NUS fits into Singapore's larger biomedical science initiative, and which focuses on integrating for impact, bringing together and coordinating the different things that universities and different agencies in Singapore do in order to create economic value. Singapore invested in the Biomedical Sciences Initiative in the year 2000. Here you can see it came from a very low base in terms of manufacturing, but by 2013, the output from manufacturing accounted for nearly 4% of Singapore's GDP, and employment went up from 5,000 to about 16,000 people. And before the year 2000, there were no private R&D laboratories in the biomedical sciences in Singapore. Today, we have 50 spending about $1 billion in R&D expenditure every year. Now, Singapore, NUS tries to contribute to this in several ways. We actually created a partnership with Duke University to establish the Duke NUS Graduate Medical School in Singapore. It issues a joint degree. It trains clinician scientists who are very necessary for translational work. But by working together between Duke University, NUS, and Singapore partners, we're able really to drive the research development very rapidly. And you can see that the Duke NUS Graduate Medical School has many collaborations with pharma companies like GSK, AstraZeneca, and has a number of new compounds in clinical testing. The other medical school, the existing medical school that we had, partnered with our Singapore Agency for Science, Technology and Research in a somewhat very different way to create a new industry sector for Singapore by developing great strengths in clinical nutrition as applied to Asian populations, and attracting and working with companies like Nestle, Danone, and Abbott. And so we foresee that over time, we will likely create a new industry sector in Singapore that had not been there before. So finally, how can universities become more innovative? This, of course, is a very difficult and contextual question. In my view, there are several requirements. The first is sufficient autonomy coupled with adequate and diversified funding resources. So this allows universities to choose the paths and the goals that they want to focus on and have the financial and other resources in order to pursue them effectively. Clearly, leadership at all levels is very important. You need to have a strong critical mass of really top-rate faculty and staff in the areas you're developing. As Tony Chan mentioned, culture is very important, so we try to promote a culture of openness, imagination, and boldness. And finally, it's not about ideas. In the end, it's about implementation. So a strong implementation ability is absolutely critical. So universities need to become more innovative because there are many drivers, as I've briefly mentioned, but there are also important opportunities for universities like the ones that are doing so well in Saudi Arabia and other parts of the world to leapfrog, to go ahead, to pioneer new pathways which will allow them to stand out in the world of universities and also to create distinctive new value for their countries and for the communities that support them. So with this, I want to end by thanking the organizing committee for the tremendous hospitality and for all their hard work, and in particular, Dr. Salem El-Malik for facilitating yet another successful and tremendous conference. I leave you with thanks from National University of Singapore. This is a picture of our new university town, which is pioneering new types of educational innovations, which I've not had time to mention, but I hope at least some of you will have the opportunity to visit us in the future. Thank you.
تود اللجنة المنظمة للمؤتمر أن تسعد بحضور الجميع لندوات هذا المؤتمر، وبالتحديد الندوة الأولى التي ستبدأ عند 1 ظهرا، ولأنها يتحدث فيها متحدثون مميزون مسؤولون كبار في بلدانهم، في فنلندا وفي هولندا وفي ماليزيا وفي هونج كونج، فتدعو السادة لحضور والسيدات لحضور هذه الجلسة وتعد بتقديم شهادات للحاضرين. معالي وزير التعليم العالي الكريم، معالي وزير التربية في إيرلندا، شكرا لكم معاليكم، وندعوكم التفضل الآن وصحبكم الكرام بتدشين المعرض المصاحب. وننوه بأننا نشكر قناتي عالي والثقافية السعودية على المشاركة في نقل هذا الحفل، وأيضا نشكر المشاهدين عبرهما لحسن المتابعة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. كيف الحال؟ أخبارك طيب؟